Hey everybody, welcome to Identiverse 2021. Can you believe it? We made it to 2021. We made it to Identiverse. Thanks for coming to the session. Hopefully you're enjoying Identiverse 2021 so far and have attended some great sessions. And for the next 20 to 22.5 minutes, yes, it's that exact, probably not really, but for the next 20 minutes, you and I are going to hang out with all of our friends. And we're going to talk about the power of relationships. Now, for those of you that don't know me, my name is David Lee, Director of Strategic Alliances over at Cloudinity. And today, like I said, we're going to talk about the power of relationships. Now, I know what you're thinking. This is an identity conference. What is this going to be about? I promise you, this is not the talk to tell you about how you can better communicate with your spouse or your kids. That is a completely different conference. This is about how we can leverage the power of our identity relationships and our identity systems that we use. So let's jump into it. A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, where there was no social media, we didn't spend all day on Twitter, and we could actually give out free hugs. I know, crazy, right? But back in the beginning, when we started dealing with identity and access management, there was one fundamental question that we needed to answer. No, it wasn't how much is Dogecoin trading for today. It was who has access to what? This fundamental question kind of launched where we are today. So to take you back, we had these systems and we were creating accounts and assigning privileges. Most of them were run via scripts, probably Perl scripts. And we really didn't know what all these things were. We knew that we could create an account and we could assign access. We knew that we'd give a new user a login. That was about it. If somebody came in and asked, hey, can you tell me about who has access to all these things? We threw our hands up. We go, nope, but I can tell you that user 56734 has an account on this system. Well, who the heck is user 56734? We had no clue. And so we started to answer these questions and figure out, like, how do we answer this? Well, one thing that helped is that we knew we had one user to one application, right? We wanted to start at the basics. So new user comes in, I log into my backend system and I say, okay, here's a new user, here's your username, you have now access to this application. Okay, no problem. Pretty simple. The next question we needed to answer was like, okay, well, how many of these users did I create into what applications? So that question grew from who has access to how many? How many of these applications are tied to this one user? How many of these logins does a user actually have, right? So is David Lee, david.lee at cloudinity.com? Is he dlee at cloudinity.com? Is he DJ157 at mainframe system? Like, we had these different logins, and so we needed to start to correlate these users to the many of the different applications. We figured that out, and what kind of helped was that we had a very linear access model. By that, we had a user to an entitlement store, to a permission, to an application. So in this case, let's say entitlement store is Active Directory, something we all know and love. In Active Directory, we had a permission. It's usually a group. And so that group represented access to an application. So walking back through our model, user, Active Directory group, which is our permission, access to an application. Easy peasy, you guys know the rest. So it is upon this foundation that we started to build our identity and access management systems, and we started to build the systems to manage this linear access model. This relationship of users to entitlement stores to permissions and applications. As things started to grow, we got more permissions, more entitlements, more groups that we needed to manage. So we needed ways to wrap those groups into a singular thing. So we started creating roles, maybe some policies, and we started assigning users to different applications, to their permissions. Everything was golden. We were figuring it out. We got to a point where we're like, hey, we got this. We know what user has how many different applications through what entitlements. We're good. Well, not really. As things tend to do, we evolved, especially in tech. Identity started to grow even more. So we said, hey, we figured this out for users, employees. Why don't we do the same thing for partners? Because partners now needed access to applications, those same applications that employees had access to. So we said, okay, should be similar model. Just have more partners and create more permissions and we'll manage it. And then we threw customers into the mix. On the other side, our applications were changing. We went from clouds just being these things in the sky that look like funny shapes and would sometimes drop water on us to things that actually ran applications, and now entire companies are built around. So the speed of which we were onboarding applications within our environment was picking up. So we've got more users, we've got more applications, starting to be a little bit of a problem. But wait, there's more. We also added into that, we changed how we decided to build applications. Applications used to be big and monolithic, meaning that we just had all of our functionality in one application. It was never meant to share that data with any other application. And so you just talk to that one application. We said, the heck with all that. Let's start building them and breaking them apart into microservice architectures and building APIs on top of those microservices. And then on top of that, we said, let's do API first applications, meaning that when we build an application, it's specifically built to talk to other applications. So you mix that up with, we've got applications that need to access other applications. They're sharing data. They need different level sets of permissions. Applications, now that they're broken up into this new kind of divided out architecture, have different permission sets within the application. And on the other side, we've got users, partners, customers. So we've got a growth of identities. We've got a growth of applications and services. We even had automation in there, right? We started making bots, things that start to do stuff for us, because humans are lazy at the end of the day, right? We don't want to do too much. So we said, hey, let's make some scripts. Let's make some automation that looks and acts like a human would act when it goes to make these changes. And so it needs the same permissions. All of this to say is that our nice little linear access model got blown up, because now we have all these different connections and all these different relationships between users and applications and services and APIs and bots and so forth and so on. So we begin to ask ourselves another question, which is this: what does that access do? So if we go back to the beginning, when we started, we had our nice little linear access model. We knew how you could assign access to a user, and we could group it together, and we could see the different applications. But we kind of stopped short of figuring out exactly what that access did. Give you a more concrete example. Most of the time when you went to Active Directory, you pulled in the groups. You would see the name of the group. If the company did a good job of actually naming and giving the groups accurate descriptions, you knew what that group did. It's like, hey, this group is an HR user application. This group handles mainframe access, so forth and so on. You kind of get the point. But as we started to grow with the different amount of entitlements, permissions, or groups that we were assigning, we didn't always do a good job of naming those groups. Also, as more applications onboarded, we didn't want to keep creating groups upon groups upon groups for every single application, because there was times when we would have like more groups than we actually had users in the system. It's actually happened. I've been at a couple of companies that have that. And that came from the fact that we were trying to assign one-to-one group to application. So what did we do? We started reusing groups for different applications. So now one group doesn't just give you access to one application. One group could give you access to 3 or 4 applications. So what that means is the first relationship we need to really understand is the relationships of entitlements to their resources. So what does this entitlement, this group, this permission, give you access to on the resource behind it? Because we really needed to understand the breadth of the access. If I'm assigning this one group, what different applications is it giving access to? Because that helps us really understand the real risk level of that entitlement, of that group that we're assigning. Because otherwise we were kind of assigning it blind, or we would get unintentional consequences. And we'll kind of walk through an example of what that is. So we have a user. We got to give him a name. Let's say this user is Darren. Darren's just joined Acme Corporation. Woohoo! Darren's an administrator, so he gets assigned to all system administrators at Acme Corp, which is an AD group. That group allows him to manage the internal HR application. And this application is used for access to internal HR needs, maybe saying I'm taking a day off, or, whatever, updating different things from an HR perspective. But since Darren's in that AD group, he has admin access to that. Also, he has access to the remote cloud servers using that same group. Now, this makes sense because Darren has been hired to be a system administrator. So he should have that access, just like everybody else does that's an administrator at Acme Corp. But now let's kind of throw something into the mix where Darren says, hey, man, this is a lot of work that's going on. We don't have enough administrators. Let's start doing some automation. Let's make a bot that kind of comes in and does some of these different, tasks that I don't really need to do that we can go automate. So we create this bot and we assign the bot the same AD group that Darren has. So now the bot has access to the AD group, therefore gets access to the internal HR application. And to clarify in this example, Darren created this script, this bot, specifically to go do some things in the HR system to take care of maybe some updates to some of the backend systems, and that's it. What Darren didn't remember is that that AD group also gave him remote server access. And so now we have two ways to get to that remote server on the cloud, Darren's account, but also this bot's account. And so again, understanding here the relationship of the resources to the entitlement is important, because as we start sharing these different permissions and having more users access these type of permissions, the risk level of this entitlement changes. Because before, if it was just system administrators, just Darren, okay, we have a process and we understand the risk of assigning this group to our administrators and what they can get access to. But now all of a sudden it's Darren, and it could be this script or these bots or these things that we're running. And so that risk level, that entitlement becomes a little bit more risky, because not only do we have to make sure we're protecting Darren's account, we got to make sure we're protecting that bot account, which means we have to watch the process of how that bot changes, what updates get done to that bot, who has access to that bot. Because now saying that Darren has access to use this bot, indirectly then Darren has access to this remote cloud server. So if we took away Darren's AD group and said, okay, Darren can no longer do that, but he still has access to the bot, then he technically still has access to the remote cloud server and the HR application, because he can do it through the bot. So we have these unintentional consequences, but we have this complex relationships behind the entitlement and the resource. This is something now that we have to track. And originally our IAM systems weren't built to do that. Again, very linear model. We're now moving into more of a complex model. We need to make sure that we're building systems to do that. So who are you? What do you want? And are you allowed to do it? It's kind of the next step after that, right? So when we looked at, okay, we need to understand what the access does, but also we really need to understand more about how this access is going to be used. So in the case that we just used with Darren and the bot, it's like if we're, that application is saying, okay, you're Darren, you've got the access to this AD group, and what are you trying to do? You're trying to run these functions. Cool. But if it's the bot coming in, maybe there's certain functions that we don't want the bot to be able to do. Or programmatically, if this is being accessed, there's certain functions that we don't want to be allowed when it's done via programmatic access versus a user actual logging in. So now things like intent start to become important, because we need to understand all of that context as we're building out these systems, as we're trying to protect these modern architectures. So one of the next relationships we need to understand is the relationships between our identity provider and our governance systems. And we need this because we really need to look at the full view of a digital identity. Governance systems represent what an identity should be. This is everything that David should have. These are the access and applications and the policies that govern all of the entitlements that have been assigned to David. That's what he should have. But governance systems are usually polling and syncing and a little bit behind. An IDP represents what an identity is and has at that moment. At the time I authenticate, it goes and accesses the directory or entitlement store and says, tell me who David is, everything he has. Now I'm going to go pass him off and let him get to this application. So let's walk through that. We're going to take our IDP, we're going to take an application, and take our governance systems. The three circles of justice. Just kidding. We have a user directory. Now, between the governance system and the user directory, like I said, there's going to be a sync process. Normally, this goes a couple of times a day, maybe multiple times a day, but the point is that it is a sync and polling process. But the governance system is talking to this user directory to make sure that the user profiles are having what they should have based on the policies in the governance system. An IDP does a just-in-time pull. Whenever that user authenticates and needs to go ask a question, it goes out to the directory and pulls it right then and there. So let's take Sarah. Sarah wants to access this application. The application says, hey, Sarah, I don't know you. So we have to ask the first question, who are you? Application says a query over to the IDP. The IDP pulls from the user directory just in time to say, okay, this is Sarah, she's authenticated. And we say, okay, Sarah, you can go into the application. Now the application says, okay, but what do you want to do? Sarah clicks within the application. Maybe she wants to run a report. Maybe she wants to access some PIA data. Whatever it is, there's an intent, there's a function that Sarah wants to take within that application. And so now our next question becomes, okay, are you allowed to do that? And this is where our next relationship comes in. because now we understand authentication. She's authenticated. And we understand some intent in what she wants to do, but we need to figure out if she's allowed to do that. Now, right now, the flow that we have is just our application and our IDP. The governance system kind of holds whether or not what Sarah is allowed to do based on the policies, but we don't have it in that flow. So here's a hint. Our next relationship is a relationship between our identity provider, our authorization systems, and governance. Again, in an effort to understand the complete view of our digital identity, access now becomes more declarative in this day and age because we need to understand attributes from all sources. We need to understand, what am I getting from the identity provider to authenticate that Sarah is who she says she is. And I need to understand more context around the authorization of what Sarah's trying to do, what she's allowed to do, and even more things as far as where is she logging in from, what time is she accessing it, right? As we have gone full bore into this zero trust world, right? This identity is the new perimeter world. What this really means from a tactical perspective of an implementation is that at each and every single point, I have to ask the user questions about their identity and constantly confirm them. Well, one of the places that I have the most information about the identity is in our IDP and, of course, in our governance system. Because now access to a group could mean also access to a service, can mean access to a resource. So we need to understand that relationship and the relationship between the three of these systems to make sure that we're providing the right access to Sarah when she needs it and authorizing the appropriate level of access. So really, we need identity-based authorization. So wrapping up, two big relationships that I want to make sure that we understand, and looking forward that we need to start making sure that our identity systems are aware of and that we're building into our architectures. So we need to understand the relationships of entitlements to resources, meaning we have to start paying attention to the back end of what's behind these resources and what they're giving access to. How are we assigning this access to different resources? Are we collecting a number of resources assigned to a specific group? Are we doing things in the cloud? Like sometimes you can do assume role. And so we create a role that access to a group of servers. And so whoever assumes this role can get access to these servers. It starts to create different questions we need to ask around how we're doing this, these entitlements, how we're assigning them, and the process that we're assigning to. Because it's not just that, hey, well, I'm looking at the account and David only had access to this resource. Okay, what other resources did David have access to that lead us to the backend resource that he wanted to get to? We also need to understand the relationship between our IDP, governance system, and our authorization policies as we start to build richer authorization policies. And we're starting to see things even from an OAuth perspective. There's a new draft spec called Rich Authorization Request. We're starting to see that we need to give more and more context around how we authorize somebody. And to pull that information, we need to understand the differences between our IDP and our governance system and all that come into our authorization policies, so we can make sure that our applications are asking the right questions and the depth of the number of questions to make sure that we're authorizing and authenticating when they need to be authenticated and giving that right level of access. And these are the challenges in front of us, right? So it forces us to look at our new systems and say, we need to understand and build systems to model these new complex relationships, just like we did with our old linear access model. So it's definitely an exciting time in identity right now. As we look at the vendors start to look at this, look into the cloud permissions and start to bring all that together, you know, I would encourage all of us, whether you work for a vendor, to make sure that we're continuing to look at that, or if you're a customer looking to implement this, push on your vendors, push on your providers to make sure that they're giving you the tools that you need to understand those relationships. And for the architects that are listening, let's make sure that we're putting that into our architecture as we're building this. So with that, we're going to wrap this up. That is the end of this session. I told you, 21 to 22, 23 and a half minutes. I was a little accurate. We were out there. But anyway, hopefully you guys enjoyed it. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot them to me here or in the chat. And yeah, we'll see you guys soon. Enjoy Identiverse.